Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and salam to all our friends all over the world. Welcome from the UK, welcome from France. Tell us in the chat where you're watching us from. My name is Katarzyna and I'm a member of the MACFEST team. And today we welcome you to the first Moroccans in Manchester with Dr. Khalid. And our host for today is Jack Welsh. Jack is an arts producer based in Liverpool, specializing in visual art. He has over 17 years experience of producing ambitious visual arts projects, commissioning artworks and programming international arts festivals. Jack is a head of programming and deputy director for Liverpool Arab Arts Festival, which is the UK's longest running annual festival of Arab arts and culture. I will put the link in the chat to that festival. Jack will introduce Dr. Khalid and also our chief guest, Sarah Mangan, Consul General of Ireland. We do want you to get involved in our event, so any thoughts, any comments or questions you might have, please put them in the chat or in the Q&A portal. We will do our best to answer all your questions today. And on behalf of MACFEST, thank you so much for all your donations. We do rely on your donations to create all these wonderful events for you. As you can see, most of them are free. So we will appreciate more if you can. Please subscribe to our newsletter, follow us on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and TikTok. And do use our hashtag spread honey, not hate. So over to you, Jack.
Thank you, Katarzyna, and hello everyone, and a very, very warm welcome from quite a global spread today. We're fantastic to see. So as from the introduction, my name is Jack Welsh from Liverpool Arab Arts Festival, and I'm really delighted today to be able to introduce you to our key speaker, Dr. Khalid Bekkioue. And today, Dr. Bekkioue is going to talk about the Moroccan discovery of Britain. He's going to look in depth in his presentation on the journeys and settlements of Moroccan merchants who arrived in Manchester in the 19th and early 20th centuries, and how the cultural, economic and social impact of those settlements. So first, an introduction. Dr. Bekkioue was born in Fez, Morocco, in August 1961. He obtained an NA in 18th century English fiction from Fez University, and then in 1996, he obtained his PhD in British theatrical Orientalism. Bekkioue is an ex-director of the Moroccan Cultural Studies Centre and Professor of English Comparative Literature and Cultural Studies. He was the chair of the English department for 6 years. His book publications include Moroccan Literature in English Translation in 2022, The Voice, a novel, again in 2022, Folk Tales from Morocco in 2019, and then Farsi Merchants Come to Manchester in 2016, which is of particular interest to this talk. Dr. Bekkioue has also published numerous publications and articles, published in such as Oxford University Press and Routledge and other key academic publications. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Bekkioue and invite him to start his wonderful presentation.
Thank you very much, Jack. I am very delighted really to participate in the event organized by the Muslim Arts and Culture Festival. I'm very delighted also to speak from Fez, because that's where most of the merchants actually started this journey to Manchester. Thank you for the introduction. You mentioned my MA on 18th century fiction. Part of it, or most of it, actually, I did as research in Manchester University. I got a small grant from the British Council, so I spent 2 or 3 months in Manchester in 1984. So I'm happy to mention that and to make this link between my research on Manchester, so emotionally linked with the city. I think Qaisra and Katazinas and you and Sarah for contributing to this presentation. Talking about the early Moroccans in Manchester, which you also described as Moroccan discovery of Britain, which a title that I like so much. We will be talking about about translation, transportation, hotels, passports, borders, ports, and ships, letters, and all these items are really there are items that allow people to cross borders from one place to the other. In a time where people are talking really about cultural separations and cultural hindrances, actually what we'll be involved with and what these people have been involved with are really crossing borders. And with the crossing of borders, of course, there is a process of translations, communication of networks, and also the transfer of cultural items from one place to the other. So the early Moroccans of Manchester, I would like to begin by drawing two contexts for this. The first one is a chronological context, history of Moroccans in Britain, and the second one will focus on the 19th century as context where we can understand why Moroccans went to Manchester. So to begin with, I'll begin with a very interesting reference, and back to 1551. 1551, there was a ship sailing from Portsmouth. The name of the ship was the Lion. And the documents saying in Hakluyt archives, saying that it was carrying a good quantity of linen, woolen cloth, coral, amber, and all these commodities that were highly sought for in Morocco. So this is the first commercial link between Morocco and England. What is interesting and intriguing in many ways is that this same ship was transporting on board from Portsmouth to Morocco, known at the time as Barbary, is what was transporting two people, two Moors from England to Morocco. And these Moors are said to be noblemen, I'm quoting, whereof one was the king's blood, conveyed by the said master into their country, out of England. So think about this. What were these Moroccans doing in England in 1551? Were they on a political mission or a commercial mission? Most probably because the text says that these commodities were highly sought for in Morocco. I think they were acting as advisors for this commercial mission. But it is important to know that already in mid-16th century, Moroccans were already in England. And if we move to the early 17th century, the Sultan al-Mansur in 1600 dispatched a famous ambassador who is the first slide will show this ambassador, and his name is Abdul Wahid Nouri, and he was ambassador from Al-Mansur to Queen Elizabeth. The aim of the mission was to propose a military alliance between Morocco and England against Spain. And there is a huge historical context for this sort of for this alliance, because England was a Protestant, and the enemy of England at the time was not Islam. The enemy was Catholic Europe, It was Portugal, Spain, and Italy, and France. Moroccans were seen as allies. And it's important to when we look at the archives of the time, to see how Moroccan Islam and British Protestantism were usually seen as in a friendly relationship. The heretics in England were considered the Spaniards were the heretics in England. And the emphasis on the link between Islam and Christianity and Protestantism in England was really part of the background for this alliance. Bearing in mind that in 1578 the Portuguese had invaded Morocco, and Morocco defeated the Portuguese army, which included, by the way, interestingly, it included soldiers from Spain and from Italy, and also from Ireland. There was a Thomas Stukely. Thomas Stukely, he was the leader of the Irish contingent fighting with the Portuguese. When Morocco defeated Portugal at the time, there were celebrations in England because they knew if Portugal won the war, the next target will be England. So there is this interesting really linkage between the two countries. And beside this military alliance, and there was also trade. And the Londoners at the time, they could see these Moroccans going through markets because they visited the markets so often, and they also saw how they practiced Islam in Britain. So the reference here says they killed all their own meat within their house, a sheep, lamb, poultry, and such like, and they turned their faces eastward when they kill anything. They use beads and pray to saints. When the next figure we need to mention, very, very important indeed, in the next slide, and that is Ben Haddou. Ben Haddou was an ambassador from Morocco to Charles II. And we need to make a historical reference here, is that in 1661, England occupied the Moroccan city of Tangier, not by any military conquest, but simply by marriage. When Charles II married the Portuguese queen, the Portuguese princess of Braganza, she gave him as a dowry the city of Tangier, which was under Portuguese occupation. And in 1682, Moulay Ismail sent his ambassador Ben Haddou to negotiate a commercial and peace treaty with Charles II. And during his 6-month stay in Britain, Ben Haddou visited Oxford and Cambridge universities. And he was a frequent guest at dinners, balls given by the British nobility, and he enjoyed going to the theatre, during which there was a full house, as advertisements for the performance stated that the Moroccan ambassador was going to attend. So people, when they knew he was going to attend, they will flock and attend these theatrical performances. So there is a huge archival material on him. And also what is interesting is that during his leisure time, as you can see from the picture, from the painting, he used to practice horsemanship in Hyde Park. So many Londoners saw him practicing in Hyde Park. And there are a lot of readings, the meaning of his horsemanship in Hyde Park. In the 18th century, Morocco became extremely important for Britain after the British occupation of Gibraltar in 1704. The Spaniards blockaded the Rock by land, and the survival of the colony depended largely on the Moroccans. They needed them for water, for food, for manpower. So Gibraltar was an important gate or route for Moroccan merchants and laborers to reach England. In Mogador, people in Morocco recounted stories of how young Moroccans made, I quote, plenty of money selling goods in the streets of London. Moroccan easily found a way to be smuggled to Gibraltar, work there for a certain period, then buy their passage to London, where they will work as peddlers. So one of the early Moroccans in England in the 18th century, they were peddlers. So we have here a peddler in the London streets, and there are many pictures of similar peddlers that they were selling their goods throughout England, to the extent that in 1725, John Windus writes, he says, we have been pretty well accustomed to see Moroccan natives in our streets. So already there were so many of them, Moroccans in the streets of London. So some of them were merchants, but many were peddlers, Muslims and Jews, predominantly from Mogador and centered basically in London. To understand the story of these peddlers, there was an interview. There was an interview in the British press where one of them says, I am a native of Mogador in Morocco. I am an Arab. I left my country when I was 16 or 18 years of age. I like to see foreign countries. When I got to Gibraltar, so you see the itinerary, when I got to Gibraltar, I began to have a little stand in the streets with silk handkerchief, cotton, and cotton handkerchiefs. After I was 6 years of age, after I spent 6 years in Gibraltar, I begin to think to do better in England. I'm trying to read the way he gave the interview. So I start off and I hear, he means in England, in London, I think in 1811. I live in a parish where I live in Mary X parish when I first came. And he talks about how after his arrival in England, he married an English woman, and both of them traveled throughout England, Scotland, and Wales, peddling their goods. This brings us to the 19th century. In the 19th century, there are two important things. Official travels sponsored by the king, and unofficial travels. The official travels, Morocco at the time sent many students to study abroad. We're talking about 1860s, 1870s, and also many ambassadors to England. There were at least two. There were several actually. Two are really important ones. One by somebody called FRSA. He's a religious scholar, and it's interesting to see how he see England. And the other one is Zbidi, who brought many gifts from the Sultan to the Queen. The students. Basically, there were 3 Moroccan students who arrived in England in 1874 and studied until 1777. Upon graduation, they were received by Queen Victoria. The second category of unofficial travelers were acrobats. There were a lot of Moroccan acrobats. The slides shows here acrobats in London as early as 1843. They were usually performing in various other places in Spain, France, Germany, and then when they found an opportunity, they also traveled and performed in England. There are a lot of troops that have been performing in 1856, in 1857, and the next slide, it shows that the next slide, it shows a number of women performers. So it's interesting that these groups traveled from the land of Islam to Christian land to perform acrobatics. And also there were the Isawi Brotherhood, who were snake charmers. I don't have illustrations, unfortunately, but they were also performing in England in the mid 18th, 19th century. And most of them easily learned to speak English. One of them, his name is Abdullah. He spoke English, French, German, Spanish, Turkish, Maghrebi, Arabic. He says, I know London well. I have an engagement to bring my troupe of acrobats to Canterbury and Oxford. I'm a member of the Masonic Lodge in Camberwell. So really interesting how they also, apart from performing, they were also part of the Masonic Lodge. Now, all this brings us now to our main topic, which is the Moroccans in Manchester. So what we conclude from this background that I have tried to conjure up is that when the FRSA merchants relocated to Manchester, from the old Medina of Fez, they were not going to a terra that is a land that is unknown. In fact, they were relocating to a country with which Morocco had long-standing commercial and political experience. So Moroccan merchants had accumulated geographical knowledge of their host country. They were familiar with foreign trade networks, with commercial contacts, and communication channels. Many of them spoke foreign languages. So some of them would come directly from Fez, but others have been trading in other parts of the Europe, like in Italy or in France or in Egypt, and then relocating from these places to England. So the Moroccan, but mostly they came from Fez. We have the names that I mentioned, some of these names, like for example, Abdel Jalil, Ben Shaqroun, Ben Jalloun, Ben Kiran, Ben Souda, Ben Nani, Ben Ikhlaf, Barrada, Bouayyad, Gassous, Hajwi, Lahlu, Tazi, Ziyad. So when Moroccans hear the names, they know that there are family names of Farsi families. And if you do the ancestry research, you will find that many people in England now, they still carry these names. So which means that not all of them returned, some of them stayed. And when and they have adopted English first names. Now, the shippers that exported exported goods to Morocco, usually it involves tea utensils, sugar, tea, coffee, spices, cotton, textile. And the Moroccan export to Britain included grain, dates, honey, almonds, ostriches, feathers, and bee wax. One of the items that was sought of in Morocco is the teapot. So this is a teapot from Manchester. So if you turn here, you see at the bottom written here, Richard Wright, Manchester. So this teapot came from Manchester in the early 20th century, and this name Richard Wright, you find it, for example, in this book. This is a Moroccan traveler. It's called the European Journey of Al-Hajwi. He went on a tourist visit to Manchester in 1919. He particularly wanted to see the factory of Richard Wright. Tea was introduced in Morocco through the English. But the Moroccans, of course, they are proud that they say we have made it Moroccan because we add mint. The English add milk, we add mint. So we have appropriated tea, the English tea. But the tea utensils were really extremely sought of. So now if you go to the Medina of Fez, looking for a teapot, they will tell you this is Manchester pot. This is Wright for Richard Wright, which means these are the guarantee the good quality of the items. So you can see the slides, some of the slides of tea. It's signs of opulence, signs of aristocracy in Morocco through tea. This is let's see the teapots. Can you show please the slides of tea? Well, we can stay with that. Let's stay with that. This is also interesting. Yeah. So what we see here. This is the Crystal Palace exhibition, and it's a panoramic picture with so many people promenading and visiting the palace. But you see in the middle of these English visitors, you see people wearing the turban, and there are 3 of them. I have blown the picture, so you see them. So it's interesting that it is not meant to show them, but because they are here, and because they are visible, they have, in a way, found their way into the picture, though initially it's not about them. And this is also in the second one, which follows, the second slide. I found this also interesting. This is Queen Victoria reviewing her army, and you can see the picture of Queen Victoria in the carriage. But what is more visible in the picture, not really Queen Victoria, but these 3 white cladded Moroccans with the turbans. So in the middle of this huge number of soldiers and crowds, and what you visibly see highlighted more than the others are these 4 Moroccans. They were, of course, they were ambassadors in 1860. But they are highlighted more prominently than Queen Victoria, who is on their right side. I find this really interesting, that this presence of the Moroccans that Windus was talking about. He says, wherever you go in London, you are bound to meet a Moroccan. So here they are. We're meeting them visually in these pictures. Okay, so so most of them came from Fez, but some of them relocated from other destinations in Africa, Egypt, Algeria, Tunisia, or from Europe, Italy, Spain, and France. But the Moroccans formed a community basically in England. We do not find Moroccan community, merchant communities in 19th century France or Italy, or it's a very small number of people trading, but not forming actually a community, and obviously not bringing their women folks with them. This never really happened. It happened only with the community of the FRSA in Manchester. So there is a document by Hayes in 1860, who talks about the visibility of Moroccans in Manchester. When you go to Manchester, he says, you are bound to meet Moroccans. If you pass along the streets in the city, you will suddenly come into sight of some white turbaned individuals whose gay Eastern dress appears in such strong contrast to the somber of the attire of those about them. And then he says how eccentric they look, but also how eccentric they behave in England, in Manchester. He says they walk not on pavements, but in a long file of more than 10 people in the wagon and cart roads, while talking loudly and laughing loudly, regardless of the neighbors, regardless of the other people. And he says that at first this was very curious, but the Manchester community got accustomed to that. At first, Moroccans hired an interpreter to help them with the transactions, but soon they acquired the knowledge. One of them says that they have not only learned the standard English, but had also acquired a knowledge of the Lancashire dialect. In addition to their propensity for learning English, the Manchester Moroccans earned the reputation of being good businessmen. But despite the fact that business run in their blood, I quote, it was not the sole mission of those people. Benjeloun explains that they had a strange inclination to the enjoyment of life, that joy of life that the English cities afforded, and the resorts of nature. He says also, there are people who have learned in their country to cherish the spring and its glorious days. So they would meet in the afternoons in Manchester and go out to public parks to enjoy themselves. In the summer, for example, of 1919, as a census explains, they would go to Liverpool, to the beach, and they will rent a big mansion, families going together in these big mansions, served by at least 7 British maids. So what we conclude from this is that the Farsi merchants pursue the life of ease and opulence, not the stereotypical image of an immigrant who lives miserly to accumulate money and send it back home. The Manchester Moroccan community brought Islam to England and brought Islam to Manchester. So when they arrived for the first time, the call to prayer was heard in England. There was, of course, it was heard in Manchester. There was, of course, no mosque, but they would gather together in a house and pray together. And also, the Manchester community started to learn about this idea of halal meat and prayer times and the Islamic rituals. So when Hajwi, I showed his book. So when Hajwi traveled to England as a tourist, and because he was a faqih, he was a religious scholar, the community gathered about him and they started asking him questions about their faith. One of the questions was whether it was valid to look at this is really extremely interesting question. Whether if you pray wearing clothes made of wool, but the animal was not slaughtered in an Islamic way, was it accepted as a prayer from God if the animal wasn't slaughtered in a Islamic way? Also, they would say, because they spent long hours working in their offices, so they would accumulate prayers. Was it acceptable if they pray, instead of praying according to each time, if they accumulate the prayers for the evening? Also, the last one of the question was it permissible? So they gather about him and ask him, was it really permissible to wear the hat? The bernita, that is the hat of foreigners. Was it permissible to wear European clothes? Of course, Al-Hajwi, he was a liberal faqih, and he said, if you travel to foreign lands, try to adapt to their way of life. Yeah. So this is the trademark of a Moroccan Manchester trader, and his name is Tazi. Yeah. We find him regularly in the archives. So the Moroccan merchants, Islam has to be so when he gives them the fatwa that it's illegal to wear European clothes, it shows how Islam is renegotiated in foreign countries, how it has to adapt to the conditions of diaspora. And with this, we refer to the story of Ben Jelloun. Ben Jelloun, Abdelmajid Ben Jelloun, studied. He was born in Casablanca, and he traveled with his family to Manchester in the early 20th century, and he attended school. And when he attended school, the next day he told his mother that he was attending prayer. So the next day she goes to the headmistress and she explains to exempt her son from attending these prayers because he was a Muslim. And he comments on this because he doesn't understand. He doesn't understand what is it to be a Muslim, which means that this child was not really educated as a Muslim. He only discovered that he was a Muslim through his experience at school. And we will also, when he talks about visitors from Morocco, he says they are strangely dressed and they speak a language which is strange, which means that within his family, they were wearing European clothes and using the English language, as we will see soon. So because of the diaspora, because of the living in a different country, Islam has to be negotiated. It has to adapt in a sense. Identity itself has to be adapted to the environment of diaspora. So many Moroccans, they because of the necessities of trade and global mobility, they applied for British citizenship. So they became citizens. And I find this really interesting, how a Moroccan take the oath of allegiance, and he says, I have spent so many years in England, and I've been and this is my address, and I have been involved in trade, etc. And now I swear I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty the Queen, her heirs and successors, according to the law. So I find this interesting, how a Muslim changes allegiance from a Muslim sovereign to a Christian queen. So there are many cases of these Moroccans who changed their citizenship, and this is the slide that one of the slides here. It shows, yeah, this one shows Al-Arbi, who is married to an English woman. It's very rare, by the way, that the Farsi community married with English women, but we have cases. So he is married to her. His daughter is called Lulu. I tried to find this name, so it's both European, but it's also, I found it means Lulu. Lulu means pearl. So I don't know if this is really a Muslim name or a European name, but certainly his son is called Randolph, Muhammad Randolph. So he gives his name, he gives a foreign name to his son, which is really interesting, how identity, of course, changes. Life in England, life in Manchester was attractive to them, but sometimes they had a lot of problems. One of the problems I would like to refer to is the story of Yasmin bin Yasmin bin she arrived in Manchester in 1906. Resided with her husband Driss at Parkfield Street. 5 months later, in 26 October, Yasmin was found hanging dead in her kitchen. The press, Manchester press, wrote under the title Moorish Lady's Death that a Moorish lady, I quote, died under the tragic circumstances on Wednesday. She had some words with a servant employed at the house, and it was alleged that the servant struck her. Her name was Jane O'Connor. Later, Yasmin was found dead in the kitchen, having hanged herself with a rope fastened to a hook at the end of the ceiling, at one end of the ceiling. So it's interesting to see this Fez, because, as I said, most of them come from aristocratic families in Fez. So she couldn't bear actually the indignity of being struck by her maid. There are other incidents. There are other incidents where maids stole money or jewelry from Moroccan couples, or when they are overpriced. Some goods are overpriced, and then they quarrel and they're taken to court, and so we see this happening. I would like to shift to and talk about Moroccan women in Manchester. I'll jump over a few things. Yeah. So Moroccan women in Manchester, because of trade, many Moroccan women had to participate actively in the diaspora experience. They have to cross waters and accompany their spouses on their long journeys, or accompany the families that they were working for as servants into these foreign lands. In their foreign lands, having come from aristocratic backgrounds, these women were accustomed to a life of luxury and affluence. They always had several maids at their service, whom they often took with them when relocating abroad. And it is indeed of great historical significance to observe a pattern in the case of Moorish servants' girl, usually sailing between Morocco and England without male companionships. So this is, I found this is really extremely important. So when I say this to Moroccan historians, they can't believe it. They can't understand that because of the conditions of trade at the time, some Moroccan women had to travel alone. But the historical documents, there is a historical documents. If you go, can you find it, please? Another slide. Not this one. Yeah, not this one. No, not this one. Yes, this one, for example. So when you look at it closely, so you have the name of the ship, you have the list of the passengers, and among the list of the passengers, all of them European names. Then you have some names. You have the names of, and this is February 20th, 1915. The ship is called Morea, and sailing from London to Morocco. Zaida bin Kiran, so with the name Zaida bin Kiran, her profession is housemaid, 30 years old. Aisha Hassan, she's a cook, aged 32. And Amber Abdullah, housemaid, 22, all of them sailing together to Morocco. And on March 1926, another document shows Miss Zahra bin Omar Tezi. She is 25 years old. servant residing at 17 Parkfield Street sailed from London to Casablanca on board the Rampura alone. So we have a group of 3 maids returning to Morocco, and then we have one woman traveling alone. Such examples of Moroccans' female journeys in the absence of males are bound to challenge the conventional perception of Oriental gender. But more often, instead of bringing their own native servants, Moroccans hired English and Irish and Scottish maids, so that in the same household, if we see the censuses, in the same household, sometimes a family has 2 or 3 maid servants. And because these women, Moroccan women, were exempted from the household duties, they spent time visiting one another. For example, Benjelloun says, women used to visit, and I'm referring to his autobiographical narrative. I'll show the picture at the end. He says, women used to visit my grandmother during the day, and their noise rose while speaking so loudly that you could hear them from the street. Their voices rose as though in dispute, which seemed incompatible with the laughter and interspersed with the laughter that interspersed with the conversation, which bewildered me. Now, interestingly, for these women to gather together during these visits, we need to understand something. When you look at these families, you'll find that they are scattered over different parts of Manchester. So they don't live, though I refer to Parkfield Street, but they are not really Parkfield Street, but they are not really living together in the same neighborhood. We have the addresses that I have collected, for example, here, and people familiar with Manchester, so you can locate them, how far from each other. So we have Moroccans living in Parkfield Street, Denmark Road, Crafton Street, Lloyd Street, Derby Street, Lothare Street, Ducey Street, Eggleton Road, etc. We can imagine that these women take in carriages to visit one another, because usually the distance is from 1 mile to 5 miles from each other. So they have to take carriages. So they have to use the transportation. They cannot wait for their husbands to take them. Their husbands are busy doing their work. So in a way, they have to appropriate space in order to survive, because they have to do that. What I also found really interesting, very interesting, is that Abdelmajid Benjelloun, he says that in his autobiographical book, he says, I often, as a child, he used to go with his mother in the evening, and with female neighbor. She was an English neighbor from Greek origin. So the mother with the female neighbor and the child, they would go together to the theater in the evening. So I found this really interesting. And when he refers to this, he does not talk about the eccentricity of the clothes. His mother does not attract any attention, which means that she was wearing European clothes. And this is documented actually in one of the historians. He says that in his book called Fès avant le protectorat, this is Letourneau, he says, Moroccan women, Farsi women in Manchester, used to wear European clothes and lead the life of the women of the country where they reside. And upon returning back to Fez, they resumed the traditional way of life. So you can see how they were exposed to modernity. I would like to end with the story that has been always haunting me, which I am glad that I've been invited to this event because I did a little bit more research preparing for this presentation and find a few amazing things. Her name is Qaisra Bekkioue. So can we show her picture? So I have two pictures of her as a child, and yes. So this is Qaisra Bekkioue. I've been looking for a picture for many years. When I wrote the book, I was disappointed that I couldn't find a picture. So I'm glad that I found this picture, and I found it on her Facebook. I don't have a Facebook account, but when I saw that in order to access the pictures, I had to create it, so I created it. And I had access to two pictures. Then I need to make sure that these are really her pictures. So I contacted her son, whose name is Khalid, and he confirmed that this is indeed his mother, and he graciously allowed me to use them for this presentation. So listen her story. Her story, and by the way, in her Facebook, she calls herself Qaisra Shahraz, referring to her husband, Al-Ghazawi, lives in Marrakesh from Manchester, United Kingdom. That's how she profiled herself in her Facebook. I think she died a few years ago, maybe 4 years ago. I always wanted to, if I can meet her, but of course, unfortunately, she passed away. She was born in Manchester in 1925 to Ahmed, a rug merchant, and Al-Ghalia. Khalid, her son, told me 2 days ago that Al-Ghalia was actually kidnapped from the south of Morocco and sold to Hamid, who married her. So she the Ghalia was born in 1920. Qaisra was born in 1925. Her family resided in 460 Moss Lane, East Manchester. Qaisra returned with her parents to Fez, where she enrolled in Rochdale School, an educational institution for young women, bourgeois women, run by two French women. The document that I have found, it says that Qaisra had assimilated Western habits and wore Western clothes. So you can see her here as a child wearing not the traditional Moroccan kaftan, but actually European clothes, which provoked the hostility of her Quranic teacher, Fqiha Fatima Al-Alamiya. Al-Alamiya persecuted and reprimanded her students who adopted Western manners and customs. And particularly, the document says, particularly she targeted Qaisra Bekkioue. However, even as a child, Qaisra was intransigent in her European attitudes. In 1440, at the age of 15, Qaisra married Muhammad Al-Ghazawi, a young Farsi capitalist who made his fortunes in real estate and bus transportation. Al-Ghazawi was a nationalist, and because he was a nationalist, he was persecuted by the French, which compelled Qaisra to immigrate to the United States. And at the time, she was pregnant, and her sole dream was to have her baby born in America so that he can be granted American citizenship. And of course, he has, and through his mother, he has British citizenship. So the baby that she was carrying at the time of traveling to America was actually Khalid, her son, whom I talked to a few days ago. So this is Qaisra Al-Ghazawi, so she went to yes, charming, beautiful woman. I also found, by the way, I found that her husband became an ambassador in 1960 in England, and there was a reception where she was wearing a video reception when she is wearing Moroccan kaftan, Moroccan clothes. So she settled in America in 1951, where she was later on joined by her husband, where most of her children were born in the States. He joined her in order to carry business in America. But when Morocco got its independence in 1956, the Moroccan Sultan asked her husband to come back to Morocco because he was appointed the director of the Moroccan security forces. Al-Ghazawi returned many times to the United States. In June 1957, Kenza's mother, Al-Ghalia, who never relinquished her British nationality, accompanied them to the United States. So I found them in the travel archives that her mother too, joined. So these were interesting, these roots, being born in Manchester, coming to Morocco because of the political situation, having to travel to America, bring her husband later on, and bring her own mother to America. So these global itineraries where women are involved. For Kenza, when she went to the United States, she went alone. Nobody accompanied her. Her husband could not travel with her because there was a risk of being captured and imprisoned by the French colonial establishment. So you see, because of historical circumstances, women had to travel alone, and where they were exposed to modernity. So the argument here, when we talk about women, because usually French colonial sociology and anthropology say that we have liberated Moroccan women and exposed them to modernity. But actually, Moroccan women were exposed to modernity long before the colonial period, and they were not only exposed to European modernity in Manchester, for example, but also they participated in it. So when we think about Benjeloun going to the theater in the evening with an English family, this is really extremely interesting. So I conclude, take another minute to conclude that the Moroccan man and women alike cross borders and became involved in international voyages. And with this, they participated actively in the global flow of goods, cultural commodities, ethnic identities, and intercultural dialogue. They helped usher modernity into a traditional Morocco and shaped Moroccan global consciousness and adopted plural identities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Khalid. That was really fascinating and in-depth presentation. Such an array of historical material that I think the resonance of echoes beyond and is felt today. And within that spirit, I would like to warmly welcome our next guest, Sarah Mangan. And Sarah is Ireland's first Consul General in Manchester, serving the north of England. A career diplomat with over 21 years experience with the Irish Foreign Service, Sarah has served in a number of roles since joining the Department of Foreign Affairs in 1999. Overseas, she has served as Deputy Head of Mission at Ireland's Embassy to Australia and at the Embassy of Ireland in Mexico. As First Secretary at the Permanent Mission of Ireland to the United Nations based in Geneva, and as Third Secretary at the Embassy of Ireland in New Delhi in India. So I'll pass over to Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And it's a real pleasure to be able to join you here today. And thank you to Khalid. That was a really fascinating introduction, I suppose, and an overview of Moroccan migration, not just to Manchester, but to Britain and more globally as well. And as Jack said, I'm the Irish Consul General in Manchester, so a lot of my knowledge of Manchester and how it's developed comes through that prism of Irish migration to Manchester. But I was fascinated to hear I suppose the different stories. When we talk about emigration and migration, we can often speak in generalities, and particularly when it comes to Irish migration, generally people will refer back to the Great Famine in Ireland in the mid-19th century that obviously kickstarted a huge amount of migration from our country, and a lot of those with Irish ancestry will often trace it back to that point. But of course, when you look at the individual stories, some of those you captured for us today so beautifully, you find it is a much richer history and more complex. So I was really interested in learning, why people leave, why people left Morocco, why they decided to come to Manchester as well. And I think there you captured it beautifully in terms of, we could very much see that it was a commercial enterprise in most cases. People are looking for opportunities, commercial opportunities, and very interesting that the type of people that were migrating to Manchester were from the wealthier classes. They were the ones with the education and with the means to be able to travel. What I also, of course, found fascinating from my perspective is the impact that they have on the places that they settle. So when migrants come, what is the impact that they have where they settle? And what it hadn't occurred to me until your presentation was not just the impact on Manchester, but also how different migrants, because Manchester, of course, was such a melting pot and still is for people coming from all over the world, how they had an impact on each other. Because I did, of course, note that the poor Moroccan woman who took her own life after the fight with the mate, her mate had an Irish name. So it would not surprise me if that mate had come across from Ireland. But just, how the different communities interact with each other in this third country as well. So I think the experiences that the Irish would have would be quite different because of the type of people that came. They were much poorer. They were forced from the country. They were forced to migrate. But looking back in Irish history as well, and I was interested in what you said about some of the Irish were fighting as part of the Portuguese army that tried to invade Morocco that didn't succeed, because there is a very rich history there as well of Irish, more well-heeled, more aristocratic Irish who were forced off their land, particularly at the time of Cromwell in the 17th century. But these were educated people, these were people with means, and they would have migrated, a lot of them, to Spain, and from Spain on to the Spanish colonies. So you come across quite a lot of Irish names in places like Chile and Peru and Mexico. As a result of that migration, and of course, some of them ended up invading Morocco. We were on the wrong side, I think, in that battle. So thank you so much just for that. There's an awful lot of things. One final point I would make, because I'm conscious other people have lots of questions as well, but one final point I would make was just, we talk about the impact that migrants have on the place that they come to, but also looking at the impact that that place had on those migrants, and then in turn they themselves have on the country that they left. And I think your points around women in particular is very noteworthy, that the Moroccan women that arrived in Manchester have much more freedom than they would have had at home. And then the impact that they would have had in bringing those freedoms in a way back to Morocco and showing Moroccans, well, this is how we can live. And these are our expectations now. And in a way, no better place than Manchester to really highlight that as a cradle of the suffragette movement as well. So I think it's certainly, Ireland has changed a huge amount and is richer because of the impact that Irish migrants to other countries had on our own country, not just in terms of remittances, which were hugely important, and bringing money, but bringing new ideas, including in the Moroccan example, not just women's freedoms, but tea. I love that the British brought the tea everywhere. We're huge tea drinkers in Ireland as well. So thank you for that, for your presentation. We found it really fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. We've had a few questions in the chat. We've probably got time to cover them all, but we'll probably have time for one or two more as well. So please use the chat function to ask Dr. Khalid or Sarah as well any questions. And the first question, Khalid, is from immigration barrister Andrew Rosemarine, who's born, bred and buttered in Manchester, and also a member of the International Platform of Moroccan Friends. Andrew asks, is Dr. Khalid aware that the only non-Morocco-born signer of the 1944 Proclamation of Independence was born in Manchester? So the only non-Moroccan-born signer of the 1944 Proclamation of Independence was born in Manchester. So Andrew is asking if that was something you've been aware of.
No, I have no idea about that. No, but I'll research it. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you for the question, Andrew. Any further information or links you'd like to pop in the chat, that would be great. So our second question is from Hanain, and Hanain was asking, I was wondering why only the families from Fez had the contribution to send their children to study in Manchester and not from other Moroccan cities.
So we're talking here about two things. We're talking about 19th century young children who were sent, sponsored by the palace to study in Europe. And we are talking about the children of families established in Manchester. On the first story, the research that I have done indicates that poorer families actually sent their kids to study in Europe, to be sponsored by the king, because at the time, if you want to get a job, a good job, it's better to have it with the state, and at the state either as a judge or as a religious scholar. So if you travel abroad, you become neither a judge nor a religious scholar. So wealthier families would keep the children to study at the University of Fez, the Islamic jurisprudence and religion. And I found that basically poorer families that they sent their kids to study abroad. And we are talking here about almost 400 Moroccan students in the 19th century, scattered over different countries. And sometimes there are petitions by the families saying to the king, because I'm sending my son to study abroad, I have no one to work for me. So can you help me? So we have letters in this case. So it wasn't seen as something glorious to send your kids to study in Europe. The case with the families of the Manchester families, because they traveled as couples, and some of their kids were born in England, so they had the opportunity. It's not only they had the opportunity, that they had to send their kids to school. For example, the last slide, it's the story of the in the last slide, is the autobiographical story of Ben Jelloun, of Abdelmajid Ben Jelloun, and he says that في الطفولة, Ben Jelloun, this book really needs to be translated because it was written in 40s, and he talks about his childhood in Manchester. And when he comes to Morocco, he's seen as an alien, and people will gather about him, and kids, and to tell them stories. When he returned to Manchester, the neighborhood kids will also gather about him, tell us about Morocco, tell us about what you've seen. So he's in neither culture, actually, he's in both. So in the book, he talks about how one day a policeman came and knocked at the door and said to his mom that her son now he has reached the age of schooling age, and he needs to go to school. So they had to send their kids to school, actually. So that's the difference between a community that settled in Manchester and had to abide also by the laws of the country and to send their kids to school, and poorer communities that were in a way forced to send their kids to school in Europe to study military engineering or to become military officers, because at the time Moulay Hassan was trying to modernize and reform the army, and he needs to send many people to study abroad. So working in the army, even as engineers, was not seen as a good job for people who think that by becoming a judge or by becoming a religious scholar, you can make it into the structure of the state. So you'll be promoted in the structure of state instead of sending. And by the way, these Moroccans who studied abroad, in the case of England, they stayed for 3 years. In the case of Italy and France, they stay longer periods, 9 years. They would stay for 9 years. So families would not afford to send their kids to study for 9 years. In 9 years, if he engages in commerce, he'll become much more wealthier. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And then next question from Steve Roman. And Steve asks, do you know where in Manchester the Moroccans stayed, or the house where they met to pray, which you mentioned in your talk?
In Parkfield, it says in Parkfield, on Parkfield Street. I don't have the exact number, but certainly if I look for it, I can find it. But it's certainly in Parkfield Street. That's where they used to meet. But sometimes there are references also to, they will gather in one of the, because they had offices in Main Street, Manchester. So they would gather in one of them and pray together. Yeah, but I would understand that this house will be used basically during the Friday prayer. But for convenience, they will also use their own offices for prayer.
And you mentioned in your presentation as well, obviously areas such as Denmark Road are all around the Whitworth Art Gallery, and that is all quite close and obviously near Rusholme and the Curry Mild area. Was that the main congregation in terms of living or working in Manchester?
In terms of working, most of their offices were on Main Street. In terms of living, as I said, they lived in different streets. But in terms of number, there will be more people living on Parkfield Street than anywhere else. So Parkfield Street, it occurs again and again, and maybe others would come back, and this is why it occurs again. Whether some people would return, but they will leave the house to another family. So Parkfield Street occurs regularly, but there are also other streets as far from because what I did actually, I did the Google map with the center of Parkfield Street, and I looked with the other addresses, and I found that sometimes it's 1 mile, sometimes 5 miles. So the center remains Parkfield Street, but they were also scattered all over other streets, which is interesting really, because they are independent. They don't live as a community that they stick together, but they are freer for their own mobility and for their own coping with life abroad. So they would not really gather together in one place. There is a sort of social independence in a sense, if we can call it that way.
Definitely, and a really interesting point that came out really beautifully in your presentation, especially the anecdote about the loud talking in the street in the horse and cart area. That was a really beautiful anecdote, and I think that, you know, the uniqueness of that integration and the kind of the reciprocal influence on both cultures and the beauty of that migration, that openness, is really a huge part of your presentation that came across. And we've following Andrew's first question, he's put fantastic comment in the chat. Dr. Khalid, excellent talk. Shukran. I look forward to your next talk on the Manchester connection with the Proclamation of Independence. And Andrew,
I look at it,
Andrew's given his email address, which we've saved as well.
I can also refer to something interesting. The King Moulay Abdelaziz, the date is maybe either the early 20th century, before the arrival of the French. He was deposed because he was seen as childishly running the country, and he was replaced by his brother Moulay Abdel Hafid. So Moulay Abdel Hafid wanted a British recognition as a sovereign of Morocco. To do this, he sent a delegation to England to persuade Foreign Office to accept him as a. And who did he send? He sent a group of Manchester merchants, because they know the language and they know the culture, and they would know how to persuade England to recognize his reign. So, and it was a successful. So Manchester merchants were also involved in politics, in Moroccan politics. So it's not unusual that there should be someone from Manchester signing the Independence Proclamation. Yeah.
And the impact of all those attributes and characteristics, as you mentioned, with the relationship with English traders, am I right in thinking that within different Arab communities at the time, that the esteem the Moroccan community were held? I think I was preparing for the talk, and I saw, for example, negative press stories about Lebanese community in Manchester as opposed to the Moroccans, who perhaps were presented because of those attributes in a different light. Was there any evidence of that, or those attributes being influencing that wider perception of the Moroccan community?
Well, they were exposed. Moroccans in Manchester, they were also exposed to xenophobia. For example, in this book, this book that is the Travel of Al-Hajwi, he says, when I arrived in Manchester and he was wearing Moroccan clothes, a group of children, they gathered about him, curiously looking at him, and the policeman has to interfere to help him go into his destination. And there is also another thing. There is Lawrence Harris. In the late 19th century, in one of his books, he says he comes to fairs and he meets Moroccan merchants, a former Manchester, and he says, "Oh, I've lived in Manchester, you know, the English that are good, they are multicultural." He says, "No, not at all. There are a lot of examples," he says, "where I was stoned in the streets of Manchester because of my clothes." So, and the case, there was the case also, the trial of Moroccans who assaulted a trader, and they were taken to court, and the neighbors testified on their behalf, and so they were acquitted. So the newspapers that run the story, so they talk about how they were acquitted because it's a trial, but they said there was a fight, and the Moors acted through their religious instinct as savages. So there was good stories that I have tried to capture, but there was also problematic issues with the lady who killed herself, with people who were stoned in the streets because of their clothes. But the thing is, because of this instinct of adaptation, and also because they gave good examples through their trade, most of the documents say that they were honest traders, and because they contributed also to the welfare of Manchester, bringing goods and sending goods, so they contributed to the economy of the city. So there, in the end, there were more favorable attitudes that developed towards this community. So when Minjloun had to return, the neighbor, the British neighbors were crying, please don't go, begging them. And in the end said, you can go, you, Mr. Benjulu can go, but please leave Abdelmajid with us. He will study here, we'll take care of him. And but he has to go. And he has to go, not because of the trade conditions, but because his daughter, his wife insisted, I want to go back. I am fed up with this dark country. I am fed up with the black Manchester. I want to go back, particularly that she was frail in her physical constitution, and she wanted to return. So when he returned basically to fulfill his wife's request, but otherwise he would have stayed. So of course, xenophobia is unavoidable in certain circumstances, but we can see how Moroccans, through the learning of the language, adaptations, giving good examples, they try to cope with it. Yeah, yes.
And Andrew has followed up with the comments that we Mancunians will give Dr. Khalid a very warm welcome to our city and promise not to stone him. So that's a reassuring message from Andrew.
I've already been there. I've already been several times in Manchester, Salford. So I worked for my MAs and later on for my PhDs and my publications. So I went often. I love Manchester, and there's some nostalgia for me to Manchester. So it's something that I feel it's like my imaginary home or something. That's how I feel about it. Yeah, particularly that now I've worked on these Moroccans, I can imagine myself that I am part of that community, though I never lived in Manchester as a citizen, but I feel that it's part of me in a sense. Yeah.
Jack, we have 5 more minutes left, and there's still 2 questions, one from Steve and the other one from Andy in the QA portal.
Okay, so I think with Andy's we've covered, but we've got one from Hanain as well saying, are there any academic researchers in Moroccan libraries on the Moroccan settlements in the UK or in general? So are there any academic research you recommend?
I don't have titles on the tip of my mouth now, but there are several researchers. I have a colleague of mine who published a book on the contemporary Moroccans in Manchester. His name is Jamei. And there's another lady. I gave a conference a few years ago, many years ago, 15 years ago. There was a lady who also has published a book, and she's a Moroccan based in England. Her PhD actually is on the Moroccan community, Moroccan immigrants to England. And there are several articles. There's an article on the trade between Manchester and Morocco. So there are a few things. The Moroccan researchers also have written a book on Anglo-Moroccan relations. The book is called something like Anglo-Moroccan relations during the time of John Drummond Hay. It's basically the 19th century, referring to Manchester goods, etc. So there are a couple of works on this. Yeah.
Brilliant. I think we'll try and squeeze these last 2 questions. Steve Roman asks again, why were the 19th century merchants from Fez from the aristocratic families and not from the general merchant class?
Yeah. The merchants were basically from Fez. Some of them were actually also from Mogador, Jews. There are also a lot of merchants, Moroccan Jews merchants, traveling to and settling in England, basically in London, because ordinary merchants cannot afford to travel. Because think about, to travel to England, first of all, you have to go to Tangier. Tangier, take a ferry to Gibraltar. You have to stay in the hotel for a couple of days to wait for the steamers coming from Australia or Japan or India going to England, so it costs a lot of money. But poorer merchants, like peddlers, they also managed to go there. So we have two categories. We have the wealthiest stayed in Manchester, good housing conditions and enjoying their life. But there are others, peddlers, Jews and Muslims from Morocco, touring all through England and selling goods. So we have two categories, the poor and the rich, both successfully made it into England.
Thank you for that. And very quickly, I'll break. Andy's got a few points. The first one, you mentioned obviously the Masonic member, who was an early Moroccan in London. Were there any other links between early Moroccans and the Masons in the UK? That was the first question. And then the second question, have you found any Moroccans who moved to Liverpool because of trade or the early Muslim community there? And then the final question, which is a great point to end on, can we find your books anywhere in the UK? So there was 3 in 1 then. I'm happy to cover any again.
The Masonic, there are a few references to the Moroccans joining the Masonic Lodge. If you search the Illustrated London News, there is even a picture with Moroccans who have joined. So I found because I wasn't focusing on this in particular. So I found references here and there. I think one can find enough material to get a clearer picture about this. For the Liverpool, first of all, the first mosque to be established in England was established in Liverpool by Quillim. Abdullah Quillim discovered Islam and converted to Islam in Fez in Morocco. And there's a picture, if we can go to the slides, it's good always to make use of them. There's a picture of a woman with a hat from a newspaper article. Yes, this one. Now, this is her name is Clara Casey. She was a dancer in Manchester, and Ben Qasim, who was an acrobat, also performing in Manchester. He met her. They both fell in love, and she converted to Islam, and they married in Liverpool, in the first mosque, and Quillim wrote the marriage contract. This is a very interesting story. Actually, you can write a book, I think, out of this, because when her husband took her to Morocco, she did not want to stay. She went to the consul and she complained, I want to go back home, and he's treating me badly, and he is a polygamist, etc., etc. And eventually he intervened, and she was set free, and she returned. So when she returned and she gave the interview, she said, he never treated me badly. It's only an excuse because I wanted to go back home. And now I would like him to come and join me, and we can perform in England. So she is related to Liverpool. I have not found any merchants trading in Liverpool. So maybe, but I am sure there are cases of Moroccans who for a short period stayed in Liverpool, but no Moroccan community really established in Liverpool. There was a guy whose name is Ben Azouz. He said, I came to England in 1853. Then I moved to Gibraltar, to Italy, to Liverpool for short periods, and then moved back to London. And in 1945, he applied for British citizenship. So short stays of merchants in Liverpool. That is certainly was the case, but as a community, I don't think so. But the establishment of the mosque in Manchester, in Liverpool, needs to be studied. There was certainly a community, a Muslim community, which made it possible for this mosque to be built. For the books, some of my books, like White Women Captives in North Africa, which was published by Palgrave, which mentioned a lot of Irish slaves in Morocco, and so that is available. It is hosted in many libraries, and I'm sure it can be ordered. For the book on the Manchester, it's not available in England, but I would be happy to send copy to anyone who would like to read it. I would be most happy to do so.
Brilliant. Huge thanks, Dr. Khalid, and thanks as well to Sarah. It's been a real pleasure for this talk, and quick thanks from myself to Qaisra, Katazana and Steve and the MACFEST team. And I would just like to hand back over to Qaisra, please.
Okay, thank you so much, Brother Khalid. It's been absolutely fascinating. Thank you, Jack. Welcome to MACFEST. You did a brilliant job. I just want to mention one item, and before I hand to Katazina, Dr. Khalid, what you said about clothing, it resonated as migrant. What you said about racism, there were early migrants would have racism, definitely resonated with us. And also about travel, if you're new to a country with language, with cultural barrier. And in those days for women, it was a big thing. So great focus on those points. The reason why I'm speaking now is really to remind people, we have got a visit to Liverpool, the first mosque in Liverpool in August. So please do join us. And I'll hand to Katazina to say goodbye.
Thank you so much, Qaisra. Jack, thank you for wonderful hosting. Once again, for everybody who's interested in Jack's work, he manages the Liverpool Arab Arts Festival, and the website is arabartsfestival.com. Dr. Khalid, thank you so much for your fascinating presentation. I'm sure many people realize that it was only an hour and a half presentation, but the research behind it was tremendous, and all your time and commitment. And I bet you've got many stories about how you, what you had to go through to find different pieces of information. We would love to hear about that maybe another time. Thank you so much to Sarah for being with us today. We really appreciate your presence. For those of you who are interested in more events, we've got one tomorrow, and that's going to be Food Stories from the Middle East. Tomorrow, 2 o'clock UK time. Then for those who are based in England, in Northwest, we do have a live event coming up in Huddersfield with an amazing musician, Gulcin Bolot. And that's going to be on Saturday, 13th of April. That's going to be celebrating Eid with Rumi and music. Then we've got another event on Tuesday, 16th of April. It's part of the Youth Festival, celebrating our cultural heritage. And then we've got a MACFEST Heritage Tour coming up to Turkey, exploring the delights of Central Anatolia. And that's going to start on Saturday, 20th of April. So do look on our website and Eventbrite to find out more about that. And by the way, this event from today has been recorded, and we will put it on YouTube, and you can also see it on MACFEST Facebook page if you do want to go back, or maybe you would like to recommend it to somebody else to watch. Then if you would like to watch us again on Zoom, we've got on April 27th, Saturday, Creative Recycling with Love with Ala Zalat, who is part of our MACFEST team. So thank you again, and yeah, hopefully see you tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to thank all the audience, wherever they are, the people who asked the questions, and Jack, who hosted the event, and Sarah for gracious comments, and Katarzyna for everything. So I'm delighted to be able to tell the stories. Very good opportunity to meet you and to talk about what we share in common in terms of these interesting stories. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. Especially thank you to those.
You've been insistent on this event, so thank you very much.
No,
And
you're
thank you
most
for being
welcome.
patient with me as well.
Excellent. It's been excellent. Absolutely thorough. We could have gone on for hours with you.
Thank you.
I particularly want to thank Sarah. She's taken a holiday and she joined us all the way from a holiday. So thank you so much. And also our attendees, you'll be pleased to know, from one end we had Karen B all the way from America. From the other end, we had Yvonne from Indonesia. And of course, the rest of us in between. Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bye-bye for now. Thank you.